Hey guys, tonight we're diving into something that'll make your modern tax headaches look like child's play. Picture this. You're standing in the heart of Tenochtitlan, the floating capital of the Aztec Empire, and you're watching grown men literally count chocolate beans like they're handling nuclear codes. The emperor just downed his 20th cup of liquid chocolate today, and somewhere in the imperial palace, a scribe is frantically updating ledgers that would make the IRS weep with envy. You probably won't survive the bureaucratic nightmare that was Aztec chocolate taxation. Seriously, they had more paperwork for a bag of cacao beans than we do for buying a house. She left home with a simple tribute payment and never came back. Why? Because in the Aztec Empire, failing to deliver your chocolate tax quota could literally cost you your life. And tonight you're about to discover just how obsessively this civilization tracked every single cacao bean that passed through their empire. In a couple of minutes, you'll find out how Moctezuma II consumed enough chocolate daily to fund a small village, while his accountants maintained the world's most sophisticated commodity tracking system, all recorded in intricate pictographic ledgers that survived 5 centuries to tell us this incredible story. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the Spanish conquistadors were more baffled by Aztec chocolate accounting than they were by human sacrifice, and how one emperor's sweet tooth accidentally created the blueprint for modern taxation systems. Here's what makes this story absolutely mind-bending. The Aztec Empire collected tribute from over 400 city-states, and cacao beans weren't just a luxury. They were literally the currency. Every transaction, every tax payment, every imperial feast was meticulously recorded by an army of scribes who treated chocolate beans with the reverence we reserve for gold bars. But here's where it gets weird. While European kingdoms were still figuring out basic bookkeeping, the Aztecs had developed a taxation system so complex that individual cacao trees were registered, tracked, and taxed based on their exact location, soil quality, and historical yield. They knew which specific grove in Xochimilco produced the beans that ended up in the emperor's morning cup. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below with your location and what time you're listening. I love seeing where in the world people are diving into these historical rabbit holes with me. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive at Tenochtitlan just as the morning mist lifts from Lake Texcoco, revealing a city that shouldn't exist. Built on an island in the middle of a lake, connected by causeways that stretch like ancient highways across the water, this is a metropolis of 200,000 people, larger than any European city of its time. But you're not here for the architecture or the floating gardens that feed this impossible city. You're here because somewhere in the maze of canals and stone pyramids, the most sophisticated chocolate accounting system in human history is about to begin its daily operations. The air carries the rich, bitter scent of cacao being processed in countless workshops, mixed with the smoke from temple fires and the general bustle of what might be the world's first true megacity. Historians still argue whether Tenochtitlan's population actually exceeded that of Paris and London combined, but there's no debate about one thing: this civilization was absolutely obsessed with tracking chocolate. You make your way through the Tlatelolco market, where the real magic happens. Here, cacao beans aren't just ingredients, they're legal tender. A tomato costs 1 bean. A turkey costs 200 beans. A canoe will set you back 8,000 beans. And every single transaction is being watched, recorded, and taxed by officials who take their chocolate accounting more seriously than modern banks take your credit score. The market sprawls across several acres of reclaimed lake bed, a testament to Aztec engineering prowess that would make modern urban planners jealous. Vendors arrange their goods in precise rows, each stall displaying not just merchandise but also the official tax stamps that prove their chocolate currency is legitimate. You notice how the cacao beans themselves vary in quality. Some are plump and oily, others smaller and bitter, but all are sorted with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker because the tax rate depends on the grade. What strikes you most is the sound, the constant clicking of beans being counted, the scratch of reed pens on bark paper, and the rhythmic chanting of numbers in Nahuatl. This isn't just commerce. It's a symphony of bureaucracy that would make a German tax office proud. The quirky part? Counterfeit cacao beans were such a problem that the Aztecs developed authentication techniques involving bite tests and specific rattle sounds that only genuine beans produce when shaken. You wake before dawn with the Kalpix, the imperial tax collector whose job makes modern IRS agents look like kindergarten teachers. His name is Itzel, and he's responsible for collecting chocolate tribute from a territory that spans 3 mountain ranges and includes over 50 villages. As he rolls up his sleeping mat in the government lodge, you notice his hands are permanently stained brown from handling millions of cacao beans, an occupational hazard that marks him as surely as a banker's ink-stained fingers. The morning ritual begins with Itzel consulting his bark paper codex, a document so complex it would give a CPA nightmares. Each page contains intricate pictographs showing exactly which villages owe what amounts of cacao, when payments are due, and what happens if they're late. The quirky detail that historians love? These tax collectors carried portable scales made from obsidian and feathers that could measure cacao beans to within a single gram, more precise than most medieval European scales used for precious metals. You follow Itzel as he begins his rounds, starting with the village of Tepetlaztac, nestled in the foothills where the best cacao grows. The village chief, a weathered man named Nikali, greets the tax collector with the kind of nervous smile you'd expect from someone about to undergo a root canal. In his hands he carries woven baskets filled with exactly 8,000 cacao beans, the quarterly tribute demanded by Moctezuma's administration. But here's where the Aztec system gets absolutely wild. Itzel doesn't just count the beans. He examines each handful for quality, checking for the telltale signs of proper fermentation, the right color gradation, and even the correct aroma. Substandard beans are rejected, and the village must make up the difference immediately. It's like having a wine sommelier audit your taxes, except the consequences for failure include forced labor in the imperial quarries. The counting process is mesmerizing to watch. Itzel arranges the beans in groups of 20, the base unit of Aztec mathematics, then groups those into larger denominations marked by specific knots on colored strings called quipu. Each knot represents a different value, and the entire system is so sophisticated that a trained Kalpix can calculate complex tribute adjustments in his head faster than you can work a calculator. Historians still argue whether the Aztec tribute system was more efficient than contemporary European tax collection, but there's no denying its thoroughness. While European kings were lucky to collect taxes once a year, the Aztecs maintained a quarterly system with monthly check-ins and weekly reports flowing back to Tenochtitlan. The imperial bureaucracy knew exactly how many cacao beans were harvested in every corner of the empire, often before local chiefs had finished their own counts. As the morning progresses, you witness something that would be familiar to any modern taxpayer: creative accounting. Village chiefs attempt to pad their tribute with slightly underripe beans mixed in with premium stock, hoping the tax collector won't notice. Itzel catches every attempt with the practiced eye of someone who's seen every trick in the book. One chief tries to argue that recent rains damaged his crop, producing a detailed weather report that would impress a meteorologist. Itzel simply points to his records showing that the same village used the identical excuse 3 years running. The most fascinating part of this whole process is the paperwork. For every transaction, Itzel creates duplicate records. One copy stays with the village, one travels back to the regional capital, and a third goes directly to Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs invented carbon copies 5 centuries before Europeans figured out bureaucratic redundancy. They understood that in an empire spanning hundreds of thousands of square miles, information was just as valuable as the chocolate beans themselves. By midday, Itzel has collected tribute from 6 villages, and his traveling companions, armed guards who double as accountants, are struggling under the weight of nearly 50,000 cacao beans. The logistics alone are staggering. Moving this much chocolate currency requires the same security protocols modern banks use for cash transfers. The beans are sorted, counted, recounted, then sealed in special containers marked with official glyphs that serve as ancient tamper evidence seals. What makes this system truly remarkable is the backup documentation. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen from ancient Egypt? Well, the Aztecs were just as obsessive about record keeping, but with chocolate. Every Calpix carried what amounted to a portable filing cabinet, multiple bark paper scrolls containing regional maps, historical tribute records, weather patterns, and even genealogical charts of local chiefs. If a village claimed their tribute capacity had decreased due to population loss, Itzel could cross-reference birth and death records going back decades. The afternoon brings you to the mountain village of Zaltepec, where things get interesting. This community specializes in producing the premium Criollo variety of cacao, the Rolls-Royce of chocolate beans that commands triple the standard tribute rate. The village chief, a sharp-eyed woman named Itzpapalotl, presents her tribute with the confidence of someone who knows her product is flawless. But even here, Itzel's inspection is thorough to the point of obsession. He cracks open individual beans to examine the internal color, sniffs for the complex aromatic compounds that indicate proper processing, and even performs what can only be described as a taste test. Yes, you're watching a tax collector sample chocolate like a professional sommelier, making notes about flavor profiles and fermentation quality that would make modern chocolatiers jealous. The Aztecs understood that cacao quality varied not just by region, but by individual grove, processing technique, and even the phase of the moon during harvest. The quirky reality of Aztec chocolate taxation hits you when Itzpapalotl produces a special tribute, beans that have been blessed by the local priests and infused with vanilla and honey. These ceremonial cacao beans are worth 10 times the standard rate, but they come with their own bureaucratic nightmare. Itzel must verify the authenticity of the religious blessing, confirm the purity of the additives, and ensure that the proper temple taxes have been paid on the enhancement ingredients. As evening approaches, you realize that being a Calpix requires the mathematical skills of an accountant, the palate of a food critic, the investigative abilities of a detective, and the physical endurance of a marathon runner. Itzel has walked 15 miles today, examined over 100,000 cacao beans, filled out dozens of forms, and somehow maintained the diplomatic skills necessary to collect taxes without starting a rebellion. The day ends with Itzel updating his master ledger by torchlight, cross-referencing the day's collections with imperial quotas and regional projections. Tomorrow, he'll start the process all over again in the next valley, carrying the weight of an empire's chocolate obsession on his permanently stained shoulders. You slip through the pre-dawn corridors of Moctezuma's palace, following the soft shuffle of sandaled feet and the gentle clink of ceramic cups. The emperor's chocolate ritual begins before the sun touches the pyramid tops, and you're about to witness the most meticulously documented breakfast routine in human history. Palace scribes are already at their stations, reed pens poised over bark paper, ready to record every drop of liquid gold that passes the imperial lips. Moctezuma too sits cross-legged on a jaguar skin cushion, surrounded by an array of chocolate vessels that would make a modern coffee shop jealous. Golden cups, jade-inlaid bowls, and ceramic chalices decorated with feathered serpents line the low table before him. But this isn't just about luxury, it's about precision. Each cup contains a different blend of cacao, and every single serving is measured, recorded, and accounted for by a dedicated team of chocolate accountants who take their job more seriously than Swiss bankers. The head scribe, a thin man named Tlacolel whose fingers are permanently stained with both ink and chocolate, announces the morning's first serving. Premium Soconusco cacao, ground with vanilla and honey, sweetened with agave nectar, temperature verified at optimal warmth. You watch as he makes careful notations in his ledger, recording not just the quantity, exactly 240 milliliters, but also the source region, processing date, and even the specific grinding stones used in preparation. Here's where things get absolutely bonkers. Moctezuma doesn't just drink chocolate. He conducts a tasting ceremony that would make wine connoisseurs weep with envy. Each cup is sampled, evaluated, and scored on a complex rating system that considers aroma, texture, flavor complexity, and what the Aztecs called divine essence. The emperor's comments are transcribed verbatim, creating what amounts to the world's first chocolate review blog, except the consequences of a bad review could mean exile for the entire cacao-growing region. The legendary 50 cups aren't consumed all at once. That would kill even the most caffeine-tolerant modern human. Instead, Moctezuma's chocolate consumption is spread throughout the day in carefully timed intervals designed to maintain optimal energy levels for imperial duties. Historians still argue whether the 50-cup claim was literal or symbolic, but the palace records suggest it was terrifyingly real. The emperor's daily cacao intake would have contained enough theobromine and caffeine to power a small village. What makes this routine truly remarkable is the quality control system. Every batch of chocolate is tested by official tasters before reaching the emperor's lips, not just for poison, which was a constant concern, but for flavor consistency and proper preparation. These tasters, members of an elite guild called the Chocolate Guardians, maintain detailed flavor profiles for every cacao-growing region in the empire. They could identify beans from specific groves by taste alone, like sommeliers distinguishing between vineyard plots. The morning progresses with mathematical precision. Cup number 7 contains cacao from the Tabasco region, mixed with ground chili peppers and a touch of salt, A combination that sounds bizarre until you realize the Aztecs understood flavor chemistry better than most modern chocolatiers. Tlacaelel records the emperor's reaction. Acceptable heat level, proper foam consistency, divine approval granted. This translates to continued tribute obligations for the Tabasco region and job security for their cacao farmers. But here's the quirky detail that historians love: Moctezuma's chocolate consumption was considered a form of religious communion. Each cup represented a different aspect of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god who supposedly gave cacao to humanity. The emperor wasn't just satisfying a sweet tooth, he was performing a sacred duty that required precise documentation for both administrative and spiritual purposes. Missing a single cup could theoretically anger the gods and doom the empire. The palace chocolate preparation area resembles a modern laboratory more than a kitchen. Grinding stones are arranged in precise rows, each dedicated to specific cacao varieties to prevent flavor contamination. Water temperature is monitored using obsidian thermometers that can detect variations of a few degrees. The foam, crucial to proper Aztec chocolate, is whipped using wooden whisks in exactly 100 rotations, no more, no less. Every step is observed and recorded by scribes who treat chocolate preparation like nuclear physics. By mid-morning, you've watched Moctezuma consume 15 cups of various chocolate blends, each one documented with the thoroughness of a scientific experiment. The emperor's personal chocolate ledger contains entries like Cup 12, Zocanachco Premium, ground fine, mixed with tequila honey, foam excellent, divine essence strong, imperial satisfaction confirmed. These records weren't just ceremonial, they formed the basis for tribute adjustments, trade negotiations, and even military decisions. The most mind-blowing aspect of this whole system is the economic impact. Moctezuma's daily chocolate consumption alone required the annual output of approximately 200 cacao trees, which meant the tribute from entire villages was dedicated solely to keeping the emperor caffeinated. The palace chocolate budget exceeded the military expenses of some European kingdoms, and every bean was tracked with obsessive precision. Remember that Calpix's tax collector Itzel from yesterday? His collections ultimately feed into this imperial chocolate machine, where palace accountants calculate daily, weekly, and monthly consumption rates with the precision of modern supply chain managers. They maintain rolling inventories, seasonal projections, and even weather-adjusted forecasts to ensure the emperor never faces the horror of a chocolate shortage. As the morning ritual concludes with cup number 25, a ceremonial blend reserved for important state decisions, you realize you've witnessed something unprecedented in human history. A civilization that treated chocolate consumption as both high art and exact science, documented with a level of detail that wouldn't be matched until the invention of modern food science. You find yourself in the palace scriptorium, surrounded by the most extraordinary accounting documents in human history. The tribute codex pages spread before you like an ancient spreadsheet system that would make Excel look primitive. These aren't just records, they're masterpieces of bureaucratic art, where every pictograph represents thousands of cacao beans flowing into the imperial treasury like chocolate rivers converging on Tenochtitlan. The head archivist, a meticulous man named Xochitl whose eyes have gone slightly crossed from decades of examining tiny glyphs, guides you through the maze of bark paper documents. Each page measures roughly 2 feet by 3 feet, covered in intricate drawings that function as both art and accounting ledger. A single page might document the tribute obligations of 20 villages, complete with pictographic representations of cacao pods, numerical glyphs indicating quantities, and calendar symbols marking payment schedules. Here's what blows your mind. These codices track not just raw numbers, but complex variables that would challenge modern database systems. Each cacao-producing region is represented by a unique pictograph. Soconusco appears as a stylized mountain with cacao pods, while Zoconochco is depicted as a flowering tree with specific leaf patterns. The scribes who created these documents had to memorize hundreds of regional symbols, each as distinct and meaningful as a modern corporate logo. The mathematical precision embedded in these pages is staggering. The Aztecs used a vigesimal counting system, base 20 instead of our base 10, which meant their numerical notation could handle massive quantities with elegant efficiency. A single glyph might represent 8,000 cacao beans, while combinations of symbols could indicate tribute payments in the millions. Historians still argue whether Aztec mathematicians were more advanced than their European contemporaries, but there's no debate about their practical application of complex calculations. You lean over Social's shoulder as he demonstrates how to read a typical tribute entry. The pictograph shows a stylized cacao tree with exactly 17 pods, surrounded by numerical glyphs and topped with a feathered crown symbol. This translates to: the region of Cuauhnahuac owes 340,000 premium cacao beans quarterly, payable to the Imperial Treasury, quality grade A, with additional tribute of processed chocolate paste equivalent to 50,000 bean value. It's like reading a contract written in hieroglyphic legalese. But here's where things get absolutely wild. These codices weren't just static records. They were living documents, constantly updated as tribute obligations changed, regions were conquered or lost, and economic conditions fluctuated. Scribes maintained multiple versions of each page, master copies kept in the palace archives, working copies for daily reference, and traveling copies that accompanied tax collectors like that Calpixquetzal you met earlier. The Aztecs invented version control centuries before computer programmers figured it out. The most fascinating pages document what can only be described as chocolate futures trading. Certain codex entries show projected tribute payments based on seasonal variations, weather patterns, and historical yield data. The Aztecs understood that cacao production fluctuated predictably, so they built mathematical models to smooth out supply disruptions. A bad harvest year in Soconusco might be offset by increased tribute from Tabasco, all calculated and recorded with actuarial precision. Social shows you a particularly complex page that documents the tribute obligations following a military conquest. When the Aztecs conquered a new cacao-growing region, scribes had to rapidly assess the territory's productive capacity, establish tribute rates, and integrate the new data into existing records. This page shows the conquest of Ayatlan, complete with before and after tribute calculations, population assessments, and even soil quality evaluations that determined optimal cacao yields. The quirky detail that makes historians giggle? These codices include what amounts to ancient customer service records. Villages that consistently delivered high-quality tribute earned pictographic, gold stars, next to their entries, while regions with quality problems were marked with warning symbols that looked suspiciously like frowning faces. The Aztecs invented performance ratings for chocolate taxation 5 centuries before modern business management discovered employee evaluations. The preservation of these documents is miraculous considering they're made from bark paper and natural pigments. The scribes used a coating technique involving tree sap and mineral compounds that created a surprisingly durable writing surface. Many codex pages have survived 5 centuries of humidity, conquest, and neglect, still legible enough for modern scholars to decode their chocolate secrets. It's like finding intact medieval tax returns, except infinitely more interesting. As you examine page after page, patterns emerge that reveal the true scope of Aztec chocolate obsession. The empire tracked not just quantity and quality, but also processing methods, storage conditions, and transportation logistics. One codex section documents the optimal travel routes for moving cacao tribute from distant provinces, complete with rest stops, security protocols, and spoilage prevention techniques. They understood supply chain management better than most modern corporations. The mathematical sophistication becomes apparent when Sochil shows you the summary pages. Documents that aggregate tribute data across the entire empire. These pages contain calculations that would challenge modern accountants: seasonal adjustments, quality premiums, transportation costs, and even exchange rates for converting cacao beans into other tribute goods. The Aztecs maintained a complex economic model that treated chocolate as both currency and commodity. Remember Moctezuma's 50 daily cups from yesterday? The codices show exactly how that imperial consumption was funded through the tribute system. Specific pages are dedicated to imperial chocolate allocation, showing which regions contributed to the emperor's personal supply versus general palace consumption versus religious ceremonies. It's like having a detailed budget breakdown for the world's most expensive coffee habit. The most mind-bending aspect of these records is their integration with astronomical observations. Certain tribute payments were timed to coincide with celestial events, and the codices include calendar correlations that link chocolate taxation to religious festivals and agricultural cycles. The Aztecs understood that cacao production was influenced by seasonal patterns, so they built their entire tribute system around natural rhythms that modern economists are only beginning to appreciate. You glide through the morning mist across Lake Xochimilco in a narrow canoe, heading toward the floating gardens where chocolate dreams literally grow on trees. The chinampas stretch out before you like an ancient agricultural miracle, artificial islands created by piling lake mud and vegetation into rectangular plots that float on the water's surface. But these aren't just any gardens. They're the empire's most heavily taxed agricultural real estate, where every cacao tree is registered, numbered, and monitored with the intensity of a modern surveillance state. Your guide is Seetlali, a chinampa farmer whose family has been growing cacao on these floating plots for 6 generations. Her weathered hands gesture toward rows of carefully tended cacao trees, each one tagged with a small obsidian marker that contains pictographic information about its tax status, yield history, and quality rating. It's like walking through an ancient database made of mud and plants, where every tree has its own social security number. The engineering marvel of these floating gardens becomes apparent as you step onto the spongy soil. The chinampas are anchored by willow trees whose roots grow down through the artificial island into the lake bed below, creating a living foundation that's both stable and flexible. But here's the kicker. The Aztec tax system took into account not just the cacao trees themselves, but the entire ecosystem that supported them. Farmers paid tribute based on the number of trees, the quality of their anchoring willows, and even the fertility of the lake mud they used for construction. Citlali explains the brutal mathematics of Chinampa taxation, while checking the ripeness of cacao pods that hang like colorful ornaments from the trees. Each plot measures exactly 100 by 10 meters, a standardized size that simplified tax calculations across thousands of floating gardens. The imperial assessors could quickly determine that a standard Chinampa should support 12 mature cacao trees, producing approximately 2,400 pods annually, yielding roughly 48,000 cacao beans. Any deviation from these numbers triggered a tax audit that would make modern IRS investigations look gentle. The seasonal rhythm of chocolate taxation becomes clear as you watch Citlali harvest pods that have reached perfect ripeness. The Aztecs understood that cacao production followed predictable cycles, so they structured their tribute system around 3 annual harvests: the main crop in late summer, a smaller winter harvest, and a bonus spring collection from the most productive trees. Farmers had to deliver specific quotas for each harvest, with quality requirements that varied by season. Here's where the system gets absolutely diabolical. The floating gardens were so productive that they generated surplus cacao beyond the tribute requirements, but farmers weren't allowed to sell this excess freely. The imperial monopoly on chocolate meant that surplus beans had to be sold back to the government at fixed prices, creating a closed-loop system that maximized state revenue, while keeping farmers perpetually dependent on imperial goodwill. Historians still argue whether the Chinampa system was sustainable in the long term, but there's no denying its short-term effectiveness. These floating gardens produced cacao yields per acre that wouldn't be matched anywhere in the world until modern industrial agriculture. The secret was the constant supply of nutrient-rich lake water and the intensive cultivation methods that treated each tree like a precious investment. The quality control measures on these floating gardens would impress modern organic farmers. Citlali shows you how cacao trees are pruned to exact specifications, with specific branch patterns that optimize pod production while maintaining the tree's health for decades. The Aztecs understood that a well-maintained cacao tree could produce tribute-quality beans for 50 years or more, so they invested in long-term agricultural planning that European farmers wouldn't adopt for centuries. But the real genius of the Chinampa tax system was its integration with the broader imperial economy. Remember that tribute codex you examined yesterday? Many of those pictographic records originated right here in these floating gardens, where imperial assessors conducted annual surveys that documented every tree, every harvest, and every quality variation. The data flowed from individual Chinampas to regional collection centers to the palace archives in Tenochtitlan, creating an information network that rivaled modern agricultural reporting systems. The quirky reality of floating garden taxation hits you when Citlali explains the inheritance laws. When a farmer died, his Chinampa didn't automatically pass to his children. It reverted to imperial control and was reassigned based on the family's tax payment history and demonstrated agricultural competence. Families could lose their floating gardens if they consistently underperformed on tribute obligations, creating a merit-based system that incentivized maximum chocolate production. The morning harvest reveals the sophisticated processing techniques that began right here in the gardens. Cacao pods are cracked open with obsidian tools, the beans extracted and sorted by size and color, then fermented in specially designed baskets that allow precise control over the chemical processes that develop chocolate flavor. The Aztecs understood fermentation chemistry well enough to produce beans with consistent flavor profiles that met imperial quality standards. As you helped Citlali load harvested cacao into her canoe, you realized the physical demands of chocolate taxation. Each floating garden required constant maintenance, adding fresh mud, pruning trees, repairing anchoring systems, and defending against the occasional storm that could destroy years of work in a single night. Farmers worked from dawn to dusk maintaining their chocolate-producing assets, knowing that a single bad harvest could result in forced labor or worse. The transportation logistics from these floating gardens to the imperial collection centers involved a complex network of canals, causeways, and intermediate storage facilities. Cacao beans had to be kept dry during transport, protected from theft, and delivered within specific time windows to prevent spoilage. The Aztecs developed waterproof containers made from specially treated gourds and created a relay system of canoe transport that could move chocolate tribute from the remotest Chinampa to the palace in less than 2 days. The environmental impact of intensive cacao cultivation on these floating gardens was something the Aztecs monitored carefully. They understood that overproduction could exhaust the lake's nutrient capacity, so they implemented rotation systems and fallow periods that maintained soil fertility across generations. It's a level of environmental planning that modern industrial agriculture is only beginning to rediscover. As the morning ends with Citlali's canoe loaded with tribute-quality cacao, you appreciate the incredible complexity of a system that turned floating mud islands into chocolate-producing factories. These farmers weren't just growing crops. They were operating sophisticated agricultural businesses under the constant scrutiny of an imperial tax system that demanded perfection with every harvest. You enter the bustling headquarters of the Paktika Merchant Guild, where the real power brokers of the Aztec chocolate economy conduct business that would make Wall Street traders jealous. These aren't ordinary merchants. They're long-distance trading specialists who maintain commercial networks spanning thousands of miles, and their record-keeping makes those tribute codices you examined earlier look like grocery lists. The guild hall buzzes with the constant scratch of reed pens on bark paper as traders document chocolate transactions that dwarf the imperial tribute system. The guild master, a sharp-eyed woman named Samna whose jade jewelry indicates serious wealth, welcomes you into the inner sanctum where the most sensitive commercial records are maintained. These documents reveal the true scope of Mesoamerican chocolate commerce, trade routes extending from modern-day Guatemala to central Mexico, involving dozens of different cacao varieties, complex exchange rates, and quality specifications that would challenge modern commodity traders. Here's what makes Paktika records absolutely fascinating. They document not just what was traded, but how, when, where, and why. A typical entry might read, traded 50,000 Soconusco premium beans for 200 quetzal feathers and 15 jade ornaments. Exchange rate favorable due to seasonal shortage in highland regions. Transport via canoe and porter relay. Total journey time 23 days. Profit margin 340% after tribute payments and transport costs. It's like reading ancient business school case studies written by people who understood international commerce better than most modern economists. The mathematical sophistication of Paktika accounting becomes apparent as Samna shows you their master ledgers. These traders maintained running calculations of exchange rates between different cacao varieties, seasonal price fluctuations, transportation costs, and regional demand variations. They understood that Criollo beans from Tabasco commanded premium prices in highland markets, while Forastero varieties from coastal regions were perfect for bulk trading. The Aztecs invented commodity futures trading centuries before Europeans figured out basic banking. But here's where things get really wild. The Paktika operated as both merchants and intelligence agents for the imperial government. Their trade records double as military reconnaissance reports, documenting the political stability of distant regions, the productivity of foreign cacao groves, and the military capabilities of potential conquest targets. A chocolate trading expedition might return with detailed maps, population estimates, and strategic assessments that informed imperial expansion decisions. The guild's quality control system would impress modern food safety inspectors. Paktika traders carried portable testing kits, obsidian blades for cutting beans, special containers for fermentation tests, and even trained taste testers who could identify the geographic origin of cacao by flavor alone. They understood that their reputation depended on delivering consistent quality across vast distances, so they developed standardization protocols that ensured a bag of Soconusco beans purchased in Tenochtitlan met the same specifications as beans bought directly from the source. Historians still argue whether the Paktika Guild operated independently or as an extension of imperial authority, but their records suggest a complex relationship that benefited both parties. The merchants gained military protection and access to imperial markets, while the government received detailed intelligence about foreign territories and a steady stream of luxury goods that couldn't be obtained through tribute alone. The logistics documented in Paktika records revealed transportation networks that rivaled modern shipping companies. Trade caravans consisted of hundreds of porters carrying standardized loads, following established routes with predetermined rest stops, supply caches, and security protocols. A single expedition might involve 2,000 people moving millions of cacao beans across terrain that would challenge modern vehicles, all coordinated through written instructions and backup communication systems. The risk management strategies employed by these ancient traders would impress modern insurance companies. Paktika expeditions diversified their cargo to minimize losses from theft, spoilage, or political disruption. A typical caravan might carry cacao beans, obsidian tools, feathers, jade, and textiles, ensuring that even if one commodity market collapsed, the expedition could still turn a profit. They understood portfolio theory 5 centuries before modern finance discovered diversification. Remember that floating garden farmer Citlali from yesterday? Her surplus cacao often ended up in Paktika hands, who could offer better prices than imperial buyers because they had access to foreign markets where chocolate commanded premium rates. The guild records show complex arbitrage operations that exploited price differences between regions, buying cheap cacao in surplus areas and selling it at high margins in markets where chocolate was scarce. The seasonal trading patterns documented in these records reveal sophisticated understanding of supply and demand cycles. Paktika traders knew that cacao prices peaked during religious festivals when chocolate consumption spiked, so they timed their expeditions to arrive in major markets just before ceremonial seasons. They also understood that highland regions paid premium prices for lowland cacao during winter months when local supplies were exhausted. The guild's relationship with imperial chocolate consumption was symbiotic and complex. While Moctezuma's 50 daily cups were supplied primarily through tribute, the palace also purchased exotic cacao varieties through Paktika networks. The emperor's taste for rare Venezuelan beans or specially processed Guatemalan chocolate created lucrative niche markets that only long-distance traders could supply. The most remarkable aspect of Paktika record-keeping was their integration of astronomical observations with commercial planning. These traders understood that seasonal patterns, religious festivals, and agricultural cycles all influence chocolate demand, so they correlated their trading schedules with calendar systems that predicted optimal market conditions months in advance. They were practicing data-driven commerce when Europeans were still figuring out basic arithmetic. The guild's training system produced merchants who combined the skills of accountants, diplomats, spies, and logistics coordinators. Young Paktika apprentices spent years learning to read and write in multiple languages, memorize complex trade routes, identify dozens of cacao varieties by sight and taste, and negotiate with foreign rulers who might view them as either valuable partners or dangerous threats. As evening falls in the guild hall, you watch Samna update the master trading calendar that coordinates expeditions across the empire. Tomorrow, caravans will depart for distant markets carrying chocolate that began its journey in those floating gardens, passed through imperial tribute systems, and now travels the ancient world's most sophisticated commercial networks. The Paktika didn't just trade chocolate. They created the economic infrastructure that made the Aztec Empire possible. You climb the steep stone steps of the Templo Mayor as dawn breaks over Tenochtitlan, following a procession of priests whose chocolate-stained robes tell the story of the empire's most sacred taxation system. The temple complex isn't just a religious center. It's the spiritual headquarters of a chocolate economy where cacao beans fund divine ceremonies and the gods themselves demand their cut of every tribute payment. The air is thick with copal incense, and the rich aroma of ceremonial chocolate being prepared for offerings that would bankrupt a small kingdom. The high priest, a gaunt man named Tlazolteotl, whose obsidian lip plug marks his elevated status, guides you through the temple's inner sanctum where the most extraordinary religious accounting takes place. Every cacao bean offered to the gods is recorded in sacred codices that combine spiritual significance with mathematical precision. These aren't just religious texts. They're divine tax records that document how chocolate taxation funded the empire's relationship with supernatural forces. Here's what makes temple chocolate taxation absolutely mind-bending. The priests calculated divine tribute based on complex theological mathematics that would challenge modern religious scholars. Different gods demanded different types of cacao offerings. Quetzalcoatl preferred premium Criollo beans mixed with vanilla, while Tlaloc the rain god required specific quantities of fermented cacao paste combined with precious jade dust. The temple maintained separate accounting systems for each deity, tracking offerings with the precision of a modern corporate budget. The morning ritual begins with the preparation of sacred chocolate for Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent god who supposedly gave cacao to humanity. Tlazolteotl oversees the grinding of exactly 400 premium cacao beans, a number chosen for its sacred significance in Aztec numerology. The beans are processed using jade grinding stones that have been blessed through elaborate ceremonies, mixed with honey that's been taxed at temple rates, and whipped into foam using golden whisks that represent divine breath. But here's where the system gets absolutely wild. The temple operated its own chocolate taxation network that paralleled the imperial tribute system. Religious communities throughout the empire owed divine tribute, in the form of cacao offerings, calculated based on their spiritual obligations rather than agricultural capacity. A village might owe the emperor 10,000 beans quarterly while simultaneously owing the temple 5,000 beans for religious ceremonies, creating a double taxation system that would make modern taxpayers revolt. The quirky detail that historians love is the temple's quality control system for divine offerings. Priests maintained taste-testing protocols that were even more rigorous than imperial standards because substandard chocolate could theoretically anger the gods and doom the empire. Sacred cacao had to meet specifications that included not just flavor and aroma, but also spiritual purity verified through divination rituals that combined religious ceremony with food science. Historians still argue whether temple chocolate taxation was more burdensome than imperial tribute, but the records suggest that religious obligations often exceeded secular ones. Major festivals like Toxgatl required massive chocolate offerings that consumed the annual output of entire cacao-growing regions. The temple maintained strategic reserves of sacred chocolate that rivaled imperial stockpiles, creating a parallel economy based on divine rather than earthly authority. The accounting methods used for religious chocolate taxation were sophisticated enough to track offerings across multiple calendar systems. The Aztecs operated both solar and ritual calendars, and temple scribes had to correlate chocolate tribute obligations with both systems to ensure proper timing of ceremonies. A single offering might be calculated using solar year cycles for agricultural planning and ritual calendar cycles for religious significance. You watch as Tlazolteotl supervises the preparation of chocolate offerings for the day's ceremonies, each one documented with obsessive precision. The morning offering to Quetzalcoatl requires 400 beans ground to specific consistency, mixed with exact proportions of honey and vanilla, heated to precise temperature, and whipped to create foam that must reach exactly 3 fingers' height above the cup rim. The measurements are recorded in sacred codices that treat chocolate preparation like nuclear physics. The temple's relationship with imperial chocolate consumption created complex jurisdictional issues that required diplomatic solutions. When Moctezuma's daily 50 cups included ceremonial blends blessed by priests, the accounting had to satisfy both imperial and religious authorities. Remember those palace chocolate guardians from earlier? They worked closely with temple officials to ensure that sacred chocolate met both quality and spiritual standards. The seasonal rhythm of religious chocolate taxation followed agricultural cycles but added layers of complexity based on ceremonial requirements. The spring planting festivals demanded offerings of young cacao shoots, summer ceremonies required fresh pods, autumn celebrations called for fermented beans, and winter rituals used aged chocolate paste that had been blessed and stored for months. The temple maintained separate storage facilities for each type of sacred chocolate, with inventory systems that tracked both quantity and spiritual potency. The most fascinating aspect of temple chocolate taxation was its integration with astronomical observations. Priests calculated offering requirements based on planetary movements, eclipse cycles, and stellar alignments that influenced the gods' chocolate preferences. Venus rising might trigger increased offerings to Quetzalcoatl, while lunar eclipses required emergency chocolate tributes to prevent cosmic disasters. The temple operated like an ancient NASA that used chocolate instead of rockets to maintain cosmic balance. The training required for temple chocolate accountants was even more rigorous than imperial scribal education. Priests had to master not just mathematics and writing, but also theology, astronomy, and the complex ritual procedures that transformed ordinary cacao beans into sacred offerings. They spent years learning to identify spiritual contamination in chocolate, perform purification ceremonies for tainted cacao, and calculate divine tribute requirements based on theological principles that modern scholars are still trying to decode. The temple's chocolate storage facilities were engineering marvels designed to preserve both physical and spiritual quality. Sacred cacao was stored in specially blessed containers, arranged according to astronomical principles, and protected by ritual barriers that prevented spiritual contamination. The priests understood that chocolate's divine properties could be damaged by improper storage, so they developed preservation techniques that combine practical food science with religious ceremony. Remember those Paktika merchants from yesterday? They maintained special relationships with temple authorities, supplying rare cacao varieties needed for specific ceremonies and exotic ingredients that enhanced chocolate's spiritual potency. The temple paid premium prices for sacred quality cacao, creating lucrative markets that incentivized the production of chocolate that met both commercial and divine standards. As the morning ceremonies conclude with offerings that consume enough chocolate to feed a village, you realize that temple taxation wasn't just about funding religious activities. It was about maintaining the spiritual infrastructure that legitimized the entire imperial system. The gods' chocolate demands created a parallel economy that reinforced imperial authority while providing divine justification for the empire's obsessive chocolate taxation. You stand in the plaza of Tlaxcala as war drums echo across the valley, watching a rebellion unfold that began with something as simple as impossible chocolate quotas. The provincial governor, a nervous man named Malintica whose hands shake as he reads the latest tribute demands from Tenochtitlan, has just announced that this year's cacao tax has been doubled to fund Moctezuma's expanded military campaigns. The crowd's reaction is immediate and violent: thrown stones, angry shouts, and the kind of fury that only comes from people pushed beyond their breaking point by bureaucratic insanity. The mathematics of rebellion become clear as you examine the tribute scroll that sparked this uprising. Tlaxcala, a mountainous region better suited for growing corn than cacao, has been ordered to deliver 800,000 premium chocolate beans quarterly, an increase of 400,000 beans over last year's already crushing quota. The problem is obvious to anyone with basic arithmetic skills. The region's cacao groves can't possibly produce that quantity, even under optimal conditions. The imperial bureaucrats in Tenochtitlan have essentially ordered the impossible, creating a tax burden that guarantees failure and punishment. Here's where the Aztec system reveals its fatal flaw. The tribute calculations were often made by palace accountants who had never visited the regions they were taxing. These bureaucrats worked from theoretical models based on ideal growing conditions, perfect weather, and maximum productivity assumptions that ignored the messy realities of actual agriculture. They treated cacao production like a mathematical equation rather than a complex biological process subject to droughts, floods, pests, and the thousand other variables that affect real farming. The rebellion's leader, a fierce warrior named Xicotencatl whose scars tell stories of previous conflicts with imperial forces, explains the impossible situation to his followers. Even if every cacao tree in Tlaxcala produced maximum yields, even if the weather cooperated perfectly, even if no beans were lost to spoilage or theft, the region could deliver perhaps 600,000 beans per quarter. The additional 200,000 beans would have to be purchased from other regions at premium prices that would bankrupt local communities. But here's the truly diabolical aspect of impossible chocolate quotas. They were often intentionally designed to fail. Imperial administrators used unrealistic tribute demands as pretexts for military intervention, land confiscation, and population enslavement. A region that couldn't meet its chocolate tax obligations could be declared rebellious, justifying conquest and the installation of more compliant leadership. It was taxation as warfare by other means. The quirky detail that makes this rebellion historically significant is the role of chocolate accounting in military strategy. Xicotenca's forces captured several imperial tribute collectors, including their detailed records of regional chocolate production. These documents revealed that similar impossible quotas had been imposed throughout the empire, suggesting a coordinated campaign to provoke rebellions that would justify expanded imperial control. Historians still argue whether the Aztec Empire deliberately used chocolate taxation to destabilize tributary regions, but the pattern is unmistakable. Regions with strategic value, fertile land, mineral resources, or important trade routes consistently received tribute demands that exceeded their productive capacity. The resulting rebellions provided convenient excuses for direct imperial administration and the seizure of local assets. The morning battle reveals how chocolate taxation had militarized the entire tribute system. Imperial forces arrived not just with weapons, but with accountants whose job is to calculate the cost of suppressing rebellion and add it to the region's future tribute obligations. It's like being charged for your own arrest, except the currency is cacao beans and the consequences include forced labor and imperial chocolate plantations. You watch as Tlaxcalan warriors attack an imperial supply convoy carrying tribute records from other rebellious regions. The captured documents revealed the scope of chocolate-related uprisings across the empire. Huexcinco has refused to deliver its quarterly cacao tribute, Cholula's farmers have hidden their chocolate reserves, and coastal regions are secretly trading with foreign merchants to avoid imperial taxation. The empire's chocolate obsession has created a network of resistance that threatens the entire tribute system. The siege tactics employed by both sides reflect the economic importance of chocolate taxation. Imperial forces target cacao storage facilities and processing centers, understanding that destroying a region's chocolate infrastructure is more effective than traditional military conquest. Meanwhile, Tlaxcalan defenders prioritize protecting their tribute records, knowing that without proper documentation, they can't prove their compliance with previous tax obligations. The rebellion's financing reveals another layer of chocolate taxation complexity. Xicotenca's forces are funded partly through liberation taxes, imposed on local cacao producers who prefer paying rebels to paying the empire. These alternative tribute systems create parallel economies where chocolate beans flow to resistance movements rather than imperial coffers. It's like having competing tax authorities, except both sides are willing to kill for their chocolate revenue. Remember that Kelpic's tax collector Itzel from earlier? His counterpart in Tlaxcala, a man named Nicali, has joined the rebellion after years of trying to collect impossible tribute quotas. His insider knowledge of imperial accounting methods proves invaluable to the resistance, revealing weaknesses in the chocolate taxation system that can be exploited by determined rebels. Former tax collectors make excellent revolutionaries because they understand exactly how the system oppresses people. The afternoon brings news that similar chocolate rebellions have erupted in Texcoco, Xochimilco, and even some districts within Tenochtitlan itself. The empire's chocolate taxation has become so burdensome that it's generating resistance faster than imperial forces can suppress it. Palace accountants who designed impossible tribute quotas from their comfortable offices are discovering that mathematical models don't account for human desperation and rage. The most tragic aspect of these chocolate rebellions is their ultimate futility. Even successful uprisings like Tlaxcala's only delay the inevitable. Imperial forces will return with larger armies, harsher tribute demands, and punishment quotas that make previous chocolate taxes look generous. The Aztec system was designed to extract maximum resources from tributary regions, and rebellions simply provided justification for more extreme extraction methods. The evening's aftermath reveals the true cost of chocolate taxation rebellion. Tlaxcalan casualties include not just warriors, but farmers, scribes, and chocolate processors whose expertise took generations to develop. The destruction of cacao groves and processing facilities will reduce the region's productive capacity for years, creating a vicious cycle where lower production leads to higher per capita tribute demands that generate future rebellions. As night falls over the battlefield littered with broken obsidian weapons and scattered cacao beans, you realize that chocolate taxation has become a cancer eating away at the empire's foundation. The system designed to fund imperial expansion is generating the very resistance that will ultimately destroy it. The rebellion in Tlaxcala is just one symptom of a chocolate economy that has grown too complex, too demanding, and too divorced from the agricultural realities that make cacao production possible. You slip through the shadowy corridors of Moctezuma's palace at midnight, following a group of men whose lives depend on their ability to distinguish between chocolate that will delight the emperor and chocolate that might kill him. The Emperor's Chocolate Tasters Guild operates in the murky world between gastronomy and espionage, where every cup of cacao could contain either divine pleasure or deadly poison. Their meticulous records document not just flavor profiles and quality assessments, but also the constant paranoia that comes with being responsible for an emperor's chocolate-fueled survival. The guild master, a thin man named Yavel whose tongue has been trained to detect the slightest chemical variations in cacao, leads you into the tasting chamber where the empire's most dangerous job takes place. The room resembles a combination laboratory and torture chamber, filled with ceramic cups, obsidian testing tools, and detailed charts that map the flavor characteristics of every cacao-growing region in the empire. But the most unsettling feature is the collection of antidotes and purging medicines that line the walls. A reminder that chocolate tasting in the imperial palace is literally a matter of life and death. Here's what makes the chocolate taster's job absolutely terrifying. They don't just sample random cacao. They test every single cup that will touch the emperor's lips, including those 50 daily servings that would challenge the constitution of a modern caffeine addict. Each taster specializes in specific types of chocolate, developing expertise that allows them to identify not just quality variations, but also the subtle chemical signatures that indicate tampering, contamination, or deliberate poisoning attempts. The Guild's record-keeping system would impress modern food safety inspectors, if those inspectors were also trained as forensic investigators. Every chocolate sample is documented with obsessive detail: source region, processing date, transport route, storage conditions, and the identity of every person who handled the cacao from harvest to palace. The tasters maintain what amounts to a chocolate chain of custody that could trace a poison bean back to the specific tree that produced it. But here's where things get really wild. The tasters don't just detect poison. They're trained to identify the specific types of toxins that might be used against the emperor. Different poisons produce different flavor alterations in chocolate, and experienced tasters can distinguish between plant-based toxins, mineral poisons, and even exotic substances imported from distant regions. They're essentially human chemical analysis machines powered by chocolate and motivated by the knowledge that failure means death. The morning routine begins with Yatel and his team conducting what they call the daily trial, systematically tasting samples from every batch of cacao that will be used in the emperor's chocolate preparation. Each taster takes small sips from designated cups, swirling the liquid to detect aroma variations, checking for unusual textures, and noting any flavor anomalies that might indicate contamination. The process takes over an hour and consumes enough chocolate to satisfy a normal person's monthly cravings. Historians still argue whether the chocolate tasters' paranoia was justified or if they were victims of imperial anxiety, but their records document numerous incidents of suspected poisoning attempts. The Guild maintained detailed files on potential threats, including disgruntled tribute collectors, rival nobles, and foreign agents who might use chocolate as a delivery system for assassination. They understood that the emperor's chocolate obsession created a vulnerability that enemies could exploit. The quality control protocols developed by the tasters influenced chocolate production throughout the empire. Remember those floating garden farmers like Citlali? They had to meet not just quantity requirements, but also purity standards that satisfied the tasters' security concerns. Cacao beans destined for imperial consumption underwent additional processing steps designed to eliminate any possibility of contamination, creating a premium product that commanded higher tribute rates. The Guild's relationship with the temple chocolate taxation system created interesting jurisdictional complications. When sacred chocolate was prepared for the emperor's consumption, both religious and security authorities had to approve the final product. The tasters worked closely with temple priests to ensure that blessed chocolate met both spiritual and safety requirements, a collaboration that combined theology with toxicology in ways that would confuse modern specialists. The training required to become an imperial chocolate taster was more rigorous than medical school. Candidates spent years developing their palates, learning to identify dozens of cacao varieties by taste alone, memorizing the flavor profiles of potential poisons, and studying the political networks that might threaten the emperor. They also had to master the diplomatic skills necessary to reject chocolate offerings without insulting the regions that produced them. The quirky aspect of the taster's job that makes historians chuckle is their development of what amounted to chocolate insurance policies. Guild members maintained detailed wills that provided for their families in case of poisoning, negotiated hazard pay that exceeded the salaries of imperial generals, and even established mutual aid societies that supported the widows of tasters who died in the line of duty. They understood that their profession was inherently dangerous and planned accordingly. The afternoon brings the most challenging part of the taster's day, evaluating exotic chocolate blends that combine cacao with rare ingredients imported through Paktika trading networks. These complex mixtures require even more careful analysis because unfamiliar ingredients could mask the taste of poisons or create new toxic combinations. The tasters maintain reference libraries of flavor profiles for hundreds of different additives, from vanilla and honey to more exotic substances like ground pearls and powdered jade. Remember that tribute rebellion in Tlaxcala from yesterday? The chocolate tasters played a crucial role in the imperial response, analyzing cacao samples from rebellious regions to determine whether they contained deliberate contamination. Their reports influenced military decisions and helped identify which regional leaders could be trusted with continued tribute obligations. The guild operated as both food safety agency and intelligence service. The evening's final tasting session reveals the psychological toll of the taster's profession. Yavel's hands shake slightly as he samples the day's last batch of imperial chocolate, not from poison but from the constant stress of knowing that a single mistake could doom both himself and the emperor. The guild maintains detailed medical records documenting the health effects of chronic chocolate consumption combined with perpetual anxiety, a combination that produces unique occupational hazards. The most sobering aspect of the chocolate tasters' records is their documentation of actual poisoning attempts. The guild's archives contain detailed accounts of incidents where contaminated chocolate was intercepted before reaching the emperor, complete with descriptions of the toxins used, the suspected perpetrators, and the brutal punishments inflicted on anyone connected to the plots. These records reveal that the tasters' paranoia was often justified and their vigilance literally kept the empire functioning. As midnight approaches and the tasters complete their final quality checks, you realize that the Emperor's Chocolate Tasters Guild represents the dark side of the Empire's chocolate obsession. Their meticulous consumption logs document not just imperial indulgence, but also the constant fear that chocolate, the Empire's greatest luxury, could become the instrument of its destruction. You arrive in the highland village of Mesoamerican just as the autumn harvest anxiety reaches fever pitch, watching an entire community grapple with the mathematical nightmare that determines their survival for the next year. The village elder, a weathered woman named Eitzel, whose gray hair reflects decades of chocolate taxation stress, stands before a crowd of farmers holding bark paper scrolls that contain the most terrifying numbers in their world. This year's projected cacao yield versus the imperial tribute obligations that never seem to decrease, regardless of actual production. The seasonal harvest calculations that unfold before you would challenge modern agricultural economists. Every cacao tree in the village has been individually assessed, its historical production documented, and its expected yield calculated based on factors including tree age, soil quality, weather patterns, and even the phase of the moon during flowering. The Aztecs understood that cacao production varied dramatically from year to year, but their tribute system demanded mathematical precision that treated chocolate beans like manufactured goods rather than agricultural products subject to natural variation. Here's what makes harvest anxiety absolutely soul-crushing. The imperial tribute quotas were set during good years and never adjusted downward during bad ones. A village that delivered 100,000 cacao beans during an exceptional harvest would be expected to maintain that level forever, regardless of droughts, floods, pest infestations, or the 1,000 other calamities that could devastate cacao production. It's like being permanently taxed based on your best year ever, with no consideration for future circumstances. The morning brings the village's most dreaded ritual, the annual cacao tree census. Teams of farmers move through the groves with obsidian counting tools, documenting every tree, every branch, and every developing pod that might contribute to this year's harvest. The process resembles a combination of agricultural survey and criminal investigation, with each tree's productivity scrutinized like evidence in a tax evasion case. The quirky detail that historians love is the use of trained children as tree counters. Their small size allowed them to climb into the canopy and count pods that adults couldn't reach. But here's where the system becomes truly diabolical. The harvest calculations had to account for multiple variables that were often beyond the farmer's control. Weather damage could reduce yields by 50%, but tribute obligations remained constant. Pest infestations might destroy entire groves, but the imperial bureaucrats in Tenochtitlan still expected their chocolate quota. The farmers were essentially gambling with their lives every planting season, betting that nature would cooperate enough to keep them out of forced labor camps. The mathematical complexity of harvest projections would impress modern statisticians. Village accountants maintained detailed records of historical yields, weather patterns, and pest cycles that allowed them to create predictive models for cacao production. They understood concepts like moving averages, seasonal adjustments, and risk assessment that European mathematicians wouldn't develop for centuries. The problem was that their sophisticated calculations were used to determine tribute obligations that could literally kill them if they guessed wrong. Historians still argue whether the Aztec tribute system was designed to be impossible, or if it simply evolved into an unsustainable burden, but the harvest anxiety records suggest deliberate cruelty. Villages that consistently met their chocolate quotas found their obligations increase the following year, creating a system where success was punished and failure was fatal. It was taxation as a form of slow-motion genocide that extracted maximum resources while maintaining plausible deniability. The afternoon brings news that sends the village into panic. Early frost has damaged approximately 30% of the developing cacao pods, reducing the projected harvest by thousands of beans. Itzo convenes an emergency council to recalculate tribute obligations and explore desperate alternatives. The options are grim: attempt to purchase additional cacao from neighboring villages at premium prices, petition imperial authorities for quota reductions that are rarely granted, or prepare for the consequences of tribute default. The village's backup plans reveal the sophisticated risk management strategies that communities develop to survive chocolate taxation. Hidden cacao reserves are maintained in secret locations, emergency trade agreements exist with distant villages, and some families have even trained their children in specialized skills that might prove valuable if forced into imperial service. It's like having a disaster preparedness plan where the disaster is your own government's tax policy. Remember those floating garden farmers like Sitlali from earlier? Villages like Amakamika often negotiated complex trade arrangements with Chinampa operators, exchanging highland products for lowland cacao that could help meet tribute quotas. These interregional chocolate markets created economic networks that sometimes operated outside imperial oversight, allowing communities to help each other survive the impossible mathematics of harvest taxation. The evening calculation session reveals the true human cost of seasonal harvest anxiety. Families huddle around flickering torches, counting and recounting their cacao beans like misers hoarding gold, knowing that mathematical errors could result in punishment that extends to their children and grandchildren. The psychological pressure of chocolate taxation has created a community of people who live in perpetual fear of their own government's accountants. The village's record-keeping system documents not just current production, but also the long-term demographic effects of harvest anxiety. Young people increasingly leave for distant regions where chocolate taxation is less burdensome. Elderly farmers die from stress-related illnesses, and birth rates decline as families postpone having children they might not be able to feed after tribute payments. The empire's chocolate obsession is literally consuming the human resources that make cacao production possible. The most tragic aspect of harvest anxiety is its self-perpetuating nature. Villages that struggle to meet tribute quotas receive increased imperial oversight, which adds administrative costs that further reduce their ability to comply with chocolate taxation. It's a bureaucratic death spiral where failure generates more failure, creating the very rebellions that imperial forces then use to justify even harsher tribute demands. The Knight's final calculations reveal that Mesoamerica will fall approximately 15,000 cacao beans short of their tribute obligation, despite every farmer working to exhaustion and every tree producing at near maximum capacity. The mathematical reality is inescapable. The village cannot meet its chocolate tax burden without external assistance or divine intervention. The empire-wide anxiety that grips communities during harvest season represents the inevitable result of a taxation system that demands the impossible and punishes the merely difficult. As dawn approaches and the villagers face another day of impossible calculations, you realize that seasonal harvest anxiety isn't just about chocolate. It's about a civilization that has created a taxation system so complex and demanding that it threatens the very agricultural foundation that makes the empire possible. The harvest calculations that keep these farmers awake at night document the slow-motion collapse of a chocolate economy that has grown too large and too greedy to sustain itself. You descend into the underground chambers beneath Tenochtitlan's ceremonial center, where the empire's chocolate wealth is stored in facilities that would make Fort Knox look like a corner grocery store. The great cocoa warehouse complex stretches through a maze of stone-lined tunnels and chambers that extend for miles beneath the city, containing enough cacao beans to fund a small nation's economy for decades. The air is thick with the rich, earthy aroma of millions of chocolate beans, and the constant sound of scribes updating inventory ledgers echoes through corridors that represent the beating heart of the Aztec economic system. Your guide is Sepakli, the chief warehouse administrator whose responsibility for managing the empire's chocolate reserves has given him the kind of stress-induced eye twitch that comes from knowing that mathematical errors in his ledgers could trigger imperial collapse. His teams of accountants work in shifts around the clock, maintaining real-time inventories of cacao stocks that flow in from tribute collections and flow out to support everything from imperial consumption to military campaigns to religious ceremonies. Here's what makes these warehouse inventories absolutely mind-blowing. They track not just quantities, but also quality grades, aging schedules, regional origins, and even the specific tribute collectors who delivered each batch of beans. A typical inventory entry might read, Chamber 7, Section 12, 50,000 Soconusco premium beans, delivered by Kalpixki Itzel on the 15th day of Toxcatl, quality grade A+, aging potential 18 months, allocated for imperial consumption and temple offerings. It's like having a wine cellar catalog, except the wine is chocolate and the stakes are the survival of an empire. The mathematical precision required to manage these inventories would challenge modern database systems. The Aztecs developed a classification system that categorized cacao beans by dozens of variables: geographic origin, processing method, fermentation level, moisture content, size distribution, and even the specific trees that produced them. Warehouse scribes could locate any batch of beans within minutes using a filing system that combined pictographic codes with numerical references that functioned like ancient barcodes. But here's where the system gets truly sophisticated. The warehouses operated on a first-in first-out rotation system that ensured optimal freshness for imperial consumption, while preventing spoilage losses that could destabilize the entire chocolate economy. Remember that harvest anxiety from Amikamika yesterday? The village's tribute beans are currently aging in Chamber 23, scheduled for release to palace kitchens in exactly 6 months when their flavor profile reaches peak complexity. The storage technology employed in these facilities would impress modern food preservation experts. Cacao beans are stored in specially designed ceramic containers that maintain optimal humidity levels, protected by natural pest deterrents, and arranged in patterns that facilitate air circulation while preventing contamination. The Aztecs understood that improper storage could destroy chocolate quality faster than military conquest, so they invested in preservation infrastructure that rivaled their architectural achievements. Historians still argue whether the great cocoa warehouses represented efficient resource management or dangerous overaccumulation, but the inventory records suggest both. The empire maintained strategic chocolate reserves that could sustain imperial operations for years during supply disruptions, but these massive stockpiles also represented wealth that was removed from circulation, creating artificial scarcity that drove up tribute demands throughout the empire. The security measures protecting these chocolate reserves would make modern banks jealous. Access to the warehouses requires multiple authorization levels, with different scribes controlling different sections and no single individual having complete knowledge of total inventory levels. The Aztecs understood that their chocolate wealth represented a target for both internal corruption and external theft, so they developed security protocols that combined physical barriers with administrative controls. The quirky detail that makes historians chuckle is the warehouse's pest control system. The Aztecs employed teams of trained cats, specialized birds, and even domesticated coatis to protect their chocolate reserves from rodents and insects. These animal employees were fed, housed, and medically cared for by the imperial government, creating what amounts to the world's first professional pest control workforce. The annual cost of maintaining these chocolate guardians exceeded the military budgets of some tributary regions. The morning inventory update reveals the staggering scale of chocolate wealth flowing through these facilities. Yesterday's tribute collections added 2.3 million cacao beans to imperial reserves, while withdrawals for palace consumption, temple offerings, and military rations totaled 1.8 million beans. The net accumulation of 500,000 beans represents enough chocolate to purchase several villages or fund a major military campaign, yet it's just another routine day in the empire's chocolate economy. The warehouse's relationship with seasonal production cycles creates complex logistical challenges that require months of advanced planning. During harvest seasons, tribute deliveries can overwhelm storage capacity, requiring temporary facilities and emergency processing protocols. During lean periods, careful rationing ensures that imperial chocolate consumption continues uninterrupted while maintaining strategic reserves for unexpected emergencies. Remember those Paktika merchants from earlier? The warehouses maintained separate sections for exotic cacao varieties obtained through long-distance trade, creating specialty inventories that supply the emperor's taste for rare chocolate blends. These premium reserves are managed with even greater security and documentation, as their loss could disrupt diplomatic relationships with distant trading partners. The afternoon brings a crisis that tests the warehouse's emergency protocols. Reports arrive that coastal tribute regions have been devastated by hurricanes, potentially disrupting chocolate supplies for months. Sepakli's teams immediately begin recalculating inventory projections, adjusting distribution schedules, and preparing contingency plans that might require rationing imperial chocolate consumption, a possibility that could trigger political instability throughout the empire. The warehouse's integration with the broader imperial economy becomes apparent during the crisis response. Chocolate reserves aren't just stored wealth, they're actively managed assets that support currency stability, international trade, and domestic consumption patterns. The inventory managers function as central bankers whose decisions about chocolate distribution influence everything from market prices to military morale to religious ceremony scheduling. The evening inventory reconciliation reveals the true complexity of managing an empire's chocolate wealth. Scribes work by torchlight to update master ledgers that track millions of individual transactions, cross-referencing tribute receipts with distribution records and identifying discrepancies that might indicate theft, spoilage, or accounting errors. The mathematical precision required to balance these books would challenge modern accountants equipped with computers and calculators. The most sobering aspect of the Great Cocoa Warehouse inventories is their documentation of imperial vulnerability. These massive chocolate reserves represent both the empire's greatest strength and its most dangerous weakness. The wealth that funds imperial expansion also creates targets for enemies, incentives for corruption, and dependencies that could collapse the entire system if chocolate supplies were disrupted. As midnight approaches and the warehouse scribes complete their daily reconciliation, you realize that these underground chambers contain more than chocolate beans. They hold the concentrated economic power that makes the Aztec Empire possible. The meticulous inventory ledgers document not just commodity storage, but the mathematical foundation of a civilization that has built its entire political system around the systematic accumulation and distribution of chocolate wealth. You enter the opulent chambers of Tenochtitlan's noble district during wedding season, where the empire's most elaborate chocolate transactions unfold in ceremonies that combine romance with the kind of financial complexity that would make modern prenuptial lawyers weep. The bride's family has spent months accumulating the cacao dowry that will seal this union between two powerful merchant houses, and the groom's representatives are conducting final negotiations over chocolate exchange rates that will determine the couple's economic future for generations. The bride, a young woman named Zakaketzel whose jade ornaments indicate serious family wealth, sits surrounded by carefully arranged baskets containing her chocolate dowry, 500,000 premium cacao beans sorted by quality grade, regional origin, and processing method. But this isn't just a pile of chocolate currency, it's a carefully curated portfolio that demonstrates her family's commercial connections, agricultural expertise, and financial sophistication. Each basket represents different aspects of the cacao economy, from tribute-grade beans suitable for imperial taxation to exotic varieties that showcase international trading relationships. Here's what makes noble chocolate dowries absolutely fascinating. They required the same level of documentation as modern real estate transactions. Every cacao bean in Zakaketzel's dowry comes with provenance records showing its origin, processing history, and quality certifications. The marriage contract includes detailed inventories that specify not just quantities, but also aging schedules, storage requirements, and even the specific ceramic containers that will house the chocolate during the first years of marriage. The groom's family, represented by a sharp-eyed negotiator named Tlacaelel, whose mathematical skills rival those palace accountants, examines each basket with the intensity of a modern financial auditor. He's not just counting beans, he's evaluating the long-term investment potential of different cacao varieties, calculating projected yields from chocolate trading ventures, and assessing the strategic value of the bride's family's agricultural connections. It's like having a wedding planner who's also a commodity futures trader. But here's where chocolate marriage economics get truly complex. The dowry negotiations must account for fluctuating cacao values, seasonal production cycles, and the political stability of tribute-paying regions. A dowry heavy in Soconusco beans might lose value if that region rebels against imperial authority, while investments in stable highland varieties could appreciate if coastal production is disrupted by storms. The families are essentially negotiating a chocolate hedge fund disguised as a wedding gift. The quirky aspect of these transactions that makes historians giggle is the role of professional chocolate appraisers, specialists who evaluate cacao quality for marriage contracts with the same rigor that modern gemologists apply to diamond certification. These experts can determine the exact fermentation level of individual beans, identify subtle flavor variations that affect market value, and even predict how different cacao varieties will age over the decades of a marriage. They're like wine sommeliers, except their expertise determines family fortunes rather than dinner pairings. Historians still argue whether chocolate dowries represented genuine economic partnerships or elaborate displays of conspicuous consumption, but the marriage record suggests both. These transactions created real wealth transfers that funded commercial ventures, established trading relationships, and provided financial security for noble families. However, they also served as competitive displays where families demonstrated their economic power through increasingly elaborate chocolate accumulations. The morning ceremony reveals the integration of chocolate dowries with the broader imperial economy. Remember those tribute collectors like Itzel and those warehouse inventories from yesterday? Noble families often invested their chocolate wealth in tribute collection contracts, using marriage dowries to finance the commercial operations that kept the empire's chocolate taxation system functioning. A well-negotiated chocolate dowry could generate returns that exceeded the profits of entire cacao-growing regions. The documentation requirements for chocolate marriage contracts would impress modern legal scholars. Every transaction must be recorded in multiple copies using both pictographic and numerical notation systems, witnessed by representatives from both families, and certified by imperial officials who verified the authenticity of the cacao involved. The contracts include provisions for chocolate inheritance, divorce settlements, and even the division of aging cacao reserves that might not reach maturity for decades. The afternoon brings the most complex part of the negotiation, determining exchange rates between different types of chocolate currency. Zacaquetzel's dowry includes not just raw cacao beans, but also processed chocolate paste, ceremonial drinking chocolate, and even exotic blends that incorporate rare ingredients from distant regions. Each category requires separate valuation using exchange rates that fluctuate based on market conditions, seasonal availability, and imperial consumption patterns. The wedding's chocolate economics revealed the sophisticated financial instruments that noble families used to manage their cacao wealth. Some dowries included what amounted to chocolate futures contracts, agreements to deliver specific quantities of beans from future harvests at predetermined prices. Others involved chocolate lending arrangements where families borrowed against their cacao reserves to finance immediate expenses while maintaining long-term investment positions. Remember those Paktika merchants and their trading networks? Noble chocolate dowries often included partnership agreements that gave newlyweds access to long-distance trading opportunities, exotic cacao varieties, and commercial intelligence that could generate profits throughout their marriage. The chocolate dowry wasn't just a one-time payment, it was an entry ticket into the empire's most lucrative commercial networks. The evening celebration features a chocolate tasting ceremony where the combined dowries are sampled by wedding guests who evaluate the quality of the union based on the flavor profiles of the cacao involved. It's like a wine tasting, except the guests are literally consuming the couple's financial future while offering commentary on their investment strategies. The social pressure to provide impressive chocolate variety would bankrupt modern wedding planners. The most remarkable aspect of chocolate marriage economics is their documentation of social mobility within the empire. Families could literally marry their way into higher social classes by accumulating sufficient cacao wealth, while noble houses that mismanaged their chocolate investments could find themselves relegated to lower status. The marriage contracts document a society where chocolate wealth determined social position more reliably than birth or military achievement. The wedding's conclusion reveals the long-term implications of chocolate dowry transactions. The newlyweds now control combined cacao assets that exceed the annual tribute obligations of several provinces, creating economic power that could influence imperial policy, fund military campaigns, or establish commercial dynasties that last for generations. Their marriage isn't just a romantic union, it's a corporate merger disguised as a love story. As the celebration ends with the ceremonial sealing of chocolate storage containers that represent the couple's combined wealth, you realize that these marriage dowries document more than noble excess. They reveal how chocolate currency created the economic infrastructure that allowed the Aztec Empire to function. The careful documentation of every cacao bean exchanged in these ceremonies provides a window into a civilization where love and commerce were inseparably intertwined through the medium of chocolate. You stand on the shores of Lake Texcoco as Spanish ships appear on the horizon like harbingers of mathematical apocalypse, watching conquistadors encounter an economic system so alien that it will take them months to understand they're looking at the world's most sophisticated commodity-based economy. Hernán Cortés himself squats beside a pile of cacao beans, turning them over in his hands like a confused child examining toys, while his treasurer attempts to calculate their value using European silver standards that make absolutely no sense in a chocolate-based economy. The Spanish confusion begins immediately when they try to apply their understanding of currency to Aztec cacao beans. Diego de Ordaz, Cortés's lieutenant whose accounting background should have prepared him for complex financial systems, stares at tribute ledgers that document millions of chocolate beans with the bewildered expression of someone trying to read quantum physics written in hieroglyphics. The Europeans are accustomed to precious metal currencies where value derives from scarcity and durability, but they're confronting a system where money is literally edible and grows on trees. Here's what makes the Spanish ledger confusion absolutely hilarious. They initially assumed that cacao beans are some kind of primitive barter system rather than a sophisticated currency with complex exchange rates, quality grades, and market mechanisms. Cortés's first reports to Spain describe Aztec chocolate money as curious brown seeds that the natives seemed to value. completely missing the fact that he's looking at a monetary system more advanced than anything in contemporary Europe. The morning brings the conquistadors' first attempt to conduct business using chocolate currency, and the results are predictably disastrous. A Spanish soldier tries to purchase food from a market vendor by offering silver coins, only to be met with blank stares and gestures toward the cacao bean exchange rates posted on bark paper signs. The vendor, a patient woman named Edsel who clearly deals with confused foreigners regularly, attempts to explain that his silver is worth approximately 3,000 cacao beans, but the transaction requires quality verification, tribute tax calculations, and documentation that the soldier can't begin to comprehend. But here's where the cultural collision becomes truly absurd. The Spanish assume that any currency they can eat must be worthless, while the Aztecs view European silver as pretty but useless metal that can't be consumed during famines, doesn't grow naturally, and lacks the divine associations that make cacao sacred. It's like watching two alien civilizations try to trade using completely incompatible concepts of value, except one civilization has built a massive empire using chocolate money while the other is still figuring out basic banking. The quirky detail that Spanish chroniclers recorded with bewildered fascination is the Aztec practice of chocolate quality control in financial transactions. They watched market vendors crack open individual cacao beans to verify internal color, sniff for proper fermentation, and reject substandard specimens with the precision of jewelers examining diamonds. The Spanish couldn't understand why anyone would apply such rigorous standards to mere food, missing the point that they were observing currency authentication procedures more sophisticated than European coin testing. Historians still argue whether Spanish economic confusion contributed to their military success or if it nearly derailed the conquest entirely, but contemporary accounts suggest both. The conquistadors' inability to understand Aztec chocolate economics initially made them seem like harmless idiots to imperial officials, but it also prevented them from effectively exploiting the tribute system that could have funded their campaigns more efficiently than looting temples. The afternoon brings a meeting between Cortés and Moctezuma's economic advisors, where the Spanish attempt to negotiate tribute payments using European concepts that translate poorly into chocolate economics. The Aztec officials, including that warehouse administrator Sapacli you met earlier, try to explain that tribute obligations are calculated based on agricultural productivity, regional capacity, and seasonal variations that can't be reduced to simple silver equivalents. It's like watching medieval accountants try to explain derivatives trading to Roman merchants. The Spanish ledger confusion reaches peak absurdity when they attempt to calculate the total wealth of the Aztec Empire using European valuation methods. Their estimates range from laughably low to impossibly high, depending on whether they're counting cacao beans as agricultural products, luxury goods, or actual currency. One Spanish accountant concludes that the empire's chocolate reserves are worth more than all the gold in Europe, while another dismisses them as worthless seeds that could be grown anywhere. Remember those great cocoa warehouse inventories from yesterday? The Spanish discovery of these facilities creates a crisis of comprehension that challenges their entire understanding of wealth and power. They find underground chambers containing millions of cacao beans organized with mathematical precision, but they can't decide whether they've discovered the empire's treasury or its granary. The concept of edible money stored like precious metals breaks their European brains. The evening brings the conquistadors' first taste of imperial chocolate, and their reactions reveal the cultural gap that separates chocolate-based and metal-based economies. Some Spanish soldiers develop immediate appreciation for the complex flavors and energizing effects of properly prepared cacao, while others dismiss it as bitter water that couldn't possibly justify the elaborate economic systems built around its production and distribution. The Spanish confusion about chocolate taxation creates opportunities for both cooperation and conflict with Aztec officials. Some conquistadors attempt to integrate themselves into existing tribute collection systems, working with Calpics like Itzel to understand regional chocolate obligations. Others try to impose European tax concepts that ignore the agricultural realities and seasonal cycles that make cacao-based taxation possible. The most tragic aspect of Spanish ledger confusion is its long-term impact on indigenous economic systems. The conquistadors' inability to understand chocolate currency leads them to dismiss it as primitive, justifying the destruction of tribute records, warehouse facilities, and accounting systems that represented centuries of mathematical and agricultural innovation. They're essentially burning down the world's most advanced commodity exchange because they can't figure out how it works. The night's final negotiations revealed the fundamental incompatibility between Spanish and Aztec economic concepts. The conquistadors want to convert everything into silver equivalents that can be shipped to Europe, while Aztec officials try to explain that chocolate wealth is embedded in agricultural systems, regional relationships, and seasonal cycles that can't be extracted without destroying the entire economy. It's like trying to download a forest into a computer. As dawn approaches and both sides struggle with translation problems that go far beyond language barriers, you realize that the Spanish arrival represents more than military conquest. It's the collision between two completely different concepts of wealth, value, and economic organization. The ledger confusion that frustrates both conquistadors and Aztec accountants documents the beginning of an economic transformation that will destroy the world's most sophisticated chocolate-based economy and replace it with something far more primitive, the simple pursuit of shiny metal. You stand in the crumbling palace archives as Tenochtitlan burns around you, watching the empire's last accountants desperately cataloging cocoa reserves while Spanish cannons thunder in the distance, and their civilization collapses in real time. The head archivist, an elderly man named Tlacaelel, whose ink-stained fingers shake as he updates the final chocolate inventory ledgers, works with the obsessive dedication of someone who understands that he's documenting the end of the world's most sophisticated commodity taxation system. The mathematical precision continues even as the empire dies. Tlacaelel's scribes maintain their meticulous record-keeping protocols, documenting every cacao bean that flows through imperial warehouses while Spanish soldiers systematically destroy the tribute collection networks that took centuries to develop. It's like watching accountants balance books during an earthquake, except the earthquake is the collapse of an entire economic system based on chocolate currency that Europeans can't begin to comprehend. Here's what makes this final inventory absolutely heartbreaking. The Aztec accountants are trying to preserve records that could theoretically allow the empire to resume chocolate taxation operations if they somehow survive the conquest. They're documenting tribute obligations, regional production capacities, and seasonal harvest schedules with the desperate hope that future generations might rebuild the complex agricultural and administrative systems that made their chocolate economy possible. The morning brings reports that Spanish forces have captured the great cocoa warehouses, and the conquistadors' reaction reveals their continued confusion about chocolate economics. They treat the massive cacao reserves like military supplies rather than currency, distributing beans to their soldiers as exotic rations while completely missing the fact that they've just seized the empire's central bank. It's like conquering Fort Knox and using the gold bars as paperweights. But here's where the tragedy becomes truly profound. The Spanish destruction of chocolate taxation records represents the loss of mathematical and agricultural knowledge that won't be redeveloped for centuries. The tribute codices that documented regional production capacities, quality control standards, and seasonal variation patterns contained information that modern agricultural economists would kill to possess. The conquistadors are essentially burning down the Library of Alexandria, except it's filled with chocolate accounting instead of classical literature. The quirky detail that makes this destruction even more tragic is the Aztec accountants' attempt to hide copies of their most important ledgers in secret locations throughout the city. Tlacaelel's teams work frantically to create duplicate records, bury chocolate taxation manuals, and preserve the mathematical knowledge that made their empire possible. Some of these hidden archives will survive for centuries, waiting for scholars who can decode their chocolate secrets. Historians still argue whether the Spanish could have maintained the Aztec chocolate taxation system if they had understood its complexity, but the evidence suggests they lacked both the mathematical sophistication and agricultural knowledge necessary to operate such an advanced commodity economy. The conquistadors were essentially medieval warriors trying to manage a system that wouldn't be matched in Europe until the development of modern futures markets. The afternoon brings the final tribute collection from regions that haven't yet learned about the empire's collapse. Calpics like Itzel arrive with their carefully documented chocolate deliveries, only to find Spanish soldiers who can't read their tribute records and don't understand the quality verification procedures that ensure proper cacao standards. The last chocolate taxes of the Aztec Empire are collected by men who treat them like spoils of war rather than sophisticated financial instruments. The warehouse evacuation reveals the staggering scale of chocolate wealth that the Spanish are inadvertently destroying through their ignorance. Remember those marriage dowries and noble chocolate investments from earlier? The conquistadors find private cacao reserves that represent generations of accumulated wealth, but they lack the documentation systems necessary to maintain proper ownership records or quality control standards. They're essentially inheriting a chocolate fortune and immediately squandering it through incompetence. The evening brings Moctezuma's final chocolate consumption, and the ceremony takes on tragic significance as the emperor's tasters perform their quality control rituals one last time. The 50 daily cups that once represented imperial power and divine communion now serve as a funeral rite for a civilization that built its entire economic system around the systematic taxation and consumption of chocolate. The meticulous consumption logs that documented every cup will soon become historical artifacts rather than administrative records. Remember those floating garden farmers like Citlali, and those highland villages struggling with harvest anxiety? The collapse of imperial chocolate taxation initially seems like liberation from impossible tribute obligations, but it quickly becomes clear that the Spanish lacked the agricultural knowledge and administrative capacity to maintain the complex systems that made large-scale cacao production possible. The Chinampa networks and regional farming cooperatives that sustain chocolate taxation will gradually decay without imperial coordination. The Knight's final ledger entries document not just the end of chocolate taxation, but the destruction of the economic infrastructure that made the Aztec Empire possible. The tribute networks that connected hundreds of regions, the quality control systems that maintained cacao standards, and the mathematical models that predicted agricultural productivity are all being dismantled by conquistadors who view them as obstacles to silver extraction rather than marvels of economic engineering. The most sobering aspect of this final inventory is its documentation of lost knowledge. The Aztec chocolate taxation system represented the culmination of centuries of agricultural experimentation, mathematical innovation, and administrative development that created the world's most sophisticated commodity-based economy. The Spanish destruction of these records represents one of history's greatest losses of economic and scientific knowledge. The palace scribes work through the night, knowing that dawn will bring the final collapse of their record-keeping systems. They document the locations of hidden chocolate reserves, the names of regional officials who might preserve local taxation knowledge, and the mathematical formulas that govern tribute calculations. It's like watching the last librarians of a dying civilization trying to preserve human knowledge for future archaeologists. As the final chocolate inventory concludes with Tlacaelel sealing the last ledger in a ceramic container that he hopes will survive the conquest, you realize that you've witnessed more than the end of an empire. You've seen the destruction of humanity's first attempt to build a sustainable economy based on renewable agricultural resources rather than finite mineral extraction. The meticulous records that documented every cacao bean, every tribute payment, and every imperial chocolate consumption represent a lost alternative to the metal-based economics that would dominate the world for the next 5 centuries. The last Aztec accountants understood something that their Spanish conquerors missed entirely. Chocolate taxation wasn't just about collecting tribute. It was about creating economic systems that could sustain large populations while maintaining environmental balance and agricultural productivity. Their final inventory documents the end of an economic experiment that modern economists are only beginning to appreciate. You sit in a quiet library 5 centuries later, surrounded by the scattered fragments of the world's most ambitious economic experiment, piecing together the legacy of Moctezuma's chocolate obsession from codex pages that survived conquest, fire, and the relentless march of time. The faded pictographs and mathematical notations spread across your desk tell the story of humanity's first attempt to build a sustainable economy around renewable agricultural resources. And the lessons embedded in these ancient chocolate taxation records are more relevant today than their creators could have imagined. The mathematical sophistication documented in these surviving ledgers would challenge modern economists equipped with computers and statistical software. The Aztec chocolate taxation system incorporated concepts that wouldn't be rediscovered in Europe for centuries: supply chain management, quality control standards, commodity futures trading, risk assessment, and even environmental sustainability planning. They understood that economic systems must account for natural cycles, agricultural limitations, and human psychology in ways that modern financial markets are only beginning to appreciate. Here's what makes the legacy of Aztec chocolate taxation truly remarkable. It represents the only large-scale attempt in human history to base an entire imperial economy on a renewable resource that could be consumed, traded, stored, and regenerated through sustainable agricultural practices. While European civilizations built their wealth on finite mineral extraction that inevitably led to depletion and conflict, the Aztecs created a system that could theoretically operate indefinitely as long as cacao trees continued to produce and farmers maintained their agricultural knowledge. The tribute codices that survived Spanish destruction reveal economic principles that modern sustainability advocates are desperately trying to implement. The Aztec system incorporated environmental costs into taxation calculations, adjusted tribute obligations based on regional ecological capacity, and maintained strategic reserves that could sustain the empire through natural disasters or climate variations. They understood that economic growth must respect agricultural limitations and environmental cycles, a lesson that contemporary economists are learning through climate change and resource depletion. But here's where the Aztec chocolate legacy becomes both inspiring and tragic. Their system worked brilliantly until it encountered a civilization that couldn't comprehend renewable resource economics. The Spanish conquest didn't just destroy an empire, it eliminated humanity's most successful experiment in sustainable commodity-based economics, replacing it with extraction-based systems that have dominated global economics ever since. We're still dealing with the consequences of that replacement 5 centuries later. Historians still argue whether the Aztec chocolate taxation system could have evolved to address its own internal contradictions, the impossible tribute quotas, the regional rebellions, the concentration of wealth in imperial hands. But the surviving records suggest that the system was already adapting to these challenges when Spanish conquest interrupted its development. The mathematical models and administrative innovations documented in the final ledgers show a civilization grappling with economic sustainability in ways that modern governments are only beginning to attempt. The quirky detail that makes chocolate taxation historically significant is its documentation of human behavior under economic pressure. The tribute records reveal how communities responded to impossible demands, how individuals navigated complex bureaucratic systems, and how entire civilizations organized themselves around the production and distribution of a single commodity. These patterns of human economic behavior remain remarkably consistent across cultures and centuries. Remember all those people you met during this journey: Itzel the tax collector, Citlali the floating garden farmer, Xochitl the archivist, Yavel the chocolate taster, and dozens of others whose lives were shaped by chocolate taxation. Their stories reveal the human cost of economic systems that prioritize extraction over sustainability, efficiency over equity, and imperial power over regional autonomy. The same tensions that generated rebellions in Tlaxcala continue to drive economic conflicts in the modern world. The morning light filtering through the library windows illuminates codex pages that document economic innovations we're still trying to understand. The Aztec integration of agricultural science, mathematical modeling, and administrative coordination created systems that managed resources across vast distances and diverse ecosystems with remarkable efficiency. Their chocolate taxation records contain lessons about supply chain resilience, quality control, and sustainable resource management that could inform modern economic policy. The afternoon brings reflection on what we lost when Spanish conquest destroyed the chocolate taxation system. The agricultural knowledge that sustained cacao production across diverse climates, the mathematical models that predicted seasonal variations, and the administrative systems that coordinated economic activity across hundreds of communities represented centuries of accumulated human wisdom that vanished in a few decades of colonial mismanagement. The evening's contemplation reveals the most profound aspect of the chocolate taxation legacy. It demonstrates that alternative economic systems are possible. The Aztec Empire proved that large-scale civilizations can be sustained through renewable resource management, that currency doesn't require precious metals, and that economic complexity can coexist with environmental sustainability. Their chocolate taxation system offers a historical precedent for the kind of economic transformation that climate change and resource depletion are forcing upon the modern world. The knight's final thoughts turned to Moctezuma's 50 daily cups and what they represented. The emperor's chocolate consumption wasn't just personal indulgence. It was the symbolic center of an economic system that connected millions of people across thousands of miles through the shared production, taxation, and consumption of a single agricultural product. His obsessive record-keeping created the documentation that allows us to understand how that system worked and why it mattered. The surviving chocolate taxation records reveal economic principles that remain relevant today: the importance of quality standards in commodity markets, the need for strategic reserves during supply disruptions, the challenges of managing seasonal production cycles, and the social tensions created by unequal resource distribution. The Aztec experience with chocolate taxation provides historical perspective on economic problems that continue to challenge modern societies. As you close the final codex and reflect on this journey through the world's most sophisticated chocolate economy, the lessons become clear. The Aztec chocolate taxation system wasn't just an ancient curiosity. It was humanity's most successful attempt to build a sustainable economy based on renewable resources and agricultural productivity. Its destruction represents one of history's greatest losses of economic knowledge, but its legacy offers hope that alternative economic systems remain possible. The mathematical precision, agricultural sophistication, and administrative complexity documented in these chocolate taxation records demonstrate human capacity for economic innovation that respects natural limits while supporting large populations. The Aztec Empire's chocolate obsession created more than tribute systems and imperial wealth. It generated knowledge about sustainable resource management that the modern world desperately needs to rediscover. The story of Moctezuma's sweet tooth and the empire it sustained reminds us that economic systems are human creations that can be redesigned, reformed, and revolutionized when circumstances demand change. The chocolate taxation records that survived conquest and time offer both historical perspective and practical inspiration for building economic systems that serve human needs while respecting planetary boundaries. The gentle rustle of ancient pages mingles with your steady breathing as the weight of centuries settles around you like a comfortable blanket. The chocolate taxation records have revealed their secrets, showing you an empire built on beans and dreams, sustained by mathematical precision and human ingenuity. The flickering candlelight dances across pictographs that once documented the flow of millions of cacao beans, each symbol representing lives lived, taxes paid, and a civilization's attempt to build something lasting from the simple pleasure of chocolate. Your eyelids grow heavy as you imagine the floating gardens of Xochimilco still producing their precious cargo, the scribes still scratching their careful notations, and somewhere in the distance, the gentle sound of cacao beans being counted by hands that understood their true value. The Aztec Empire sleeps now in these fragile pages, but its lessons about sustainability, complexity, and the human cost of economic systems whisper through the centuries like a lullaby for a world still learning to balance growth with wisdom. The last codex closes with a soft whisper, and the library settles into peaceful silence. The chocolate taxation system that once connected hundreds of communities across a vast empire has become a gentle story that carries you towards sleep, where dreams of floating gardens and mathematical precision blend with the sweet memory of humanity's most ambitious economic experiment. Rest now, knowing that some stories survive not just in books, but in the quiet wisdom they leave behind for those who take the time to listen.